Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Last week we got partway through the prep for the driver and the body on the Comical Grasshopper. So this week we're going to finish it up. The last thing we did was make some plastic filler up and fill the gaps in the back of the helmet. If you want to see more detail, check out part 6 of the series. After leaving it to harden up, we need to wet sand the seam and the rear of the helmet to get it fairly smooth. You can be fairly aggressive with some 400 grit using soapy water. It's also a good idea, since we're going to be getting it wet, to seal up the hole in the bottom with some blue tack so we don't fill it up with water. After the first pass we have a much smoother looking helmet. It's not perfect yet though, but it's really difficult to see what's going on with it all being in white. So next we're going to paint the helmet in some plastic primer, then a high build primer that's a nice contrasty colour. And while that's happening, I've also primed the body with some plastic primer and a quick coat of a matte white so it's ready for colour. This is the helmet with some high build red. Now I've avoided painting the face as far as possible with the high build. A little overspray won't matter, I just didn't want to fill in all the facial details. You can see it's fairly smooth except for some dimples on the top and some on the rear. If the helmet was going to be out in the open, I'd go for a perfect finish, but the body has a roof and the ESC and radio are going to sit behind, so I'll just give it another go with the wet sand, taking it back so we're just starting to go through the red. You can see it's looking better. There's still some imperfections, but nothing you're going to see when the body's on. Next we're going to give it a coat with some white primer. Okay, next we can mask the face with some Tamiya masking tape, making sure the edges are nicely sealed. Then we can paint the helmet. Looking through my collection, I found some candy red and a coarse silver base. Add some lacquer and I think it looks pretty good. It's not had that long to harden up yet though, so before we finger it too much trying to take the mask off, we're going to leave it for a couple more hours. We really don't want to leave any fingerprints. While the helmet's drying, we're going to paint the body. Now I'm a big fan of Tamiya paints, but any hobby paint will work just as well. Choose your colours, pick up a brush and go for it. Sometime later we have this. Now it's not perfect, but it's going to do the trick. I tried to pick colours from the decal sheet so it all comes together. And now back to the helmet, which is now hard enough to handle without risking fingerprints. We can now peel off the mask to reveal the face, which is ready for its paint. A little bit of flat flesh, some white and black for the bulk of it, and a quick wash with some watered down brown, and he's good to go. Painting faces, and painting in general, could be a whole video on its own, and there's lots of people far better at it than I am. I think the biggest thing is always going to be down to practice, and having a nice set of brushes. Have a search for articles and videos on painting static models. There's loads of learning to do. Right, before we can fit him to the chassis, we need to put the mount back together. Just as we did in the last video, we pop the top part into the top of the body, insert the M3 screw and thread on the head. Nip up the screw, remembering not to go too tight as there isn't much plastic around the captured nut. We don't want to crush it and have it fall apart. Then for the bottom part we use the 2 countersunk screws. Thread them in, do them up, and he's ready to fit. Right, first things first, we need to get a feel for how much space we have with the ESC in place. If we remove the body, we can sit the ESC at the rear and stick it down with some blue tack. Pop the body back on and we can see just how much space we have. Turns out with this body there's loads of room. As long as the driver doesn't go much further back than the side vents for the battery, there's not going to be a problem. Using the same technique we can stick the driver down and see how he looks. Because the body hasn't been painted yet, it's super easy to see the clearances and fits. Remember, in a crash the body is going to flex, so we want a good bit of space between the driver's gloves and the window. It looks like we want the rear of the driver's mount to be just in front of the rearmost part of the battery vent, which makes it nice and simple. We just need to remove the driver again and the blue tack, clean up the surfaces thoroughly with some alcohol to get rid of any oil, then stick him down with some servo tape. Now the tape that the kit comes with works just fine, but I prefer using Fast Track's tape as it doesn't fall apart if you ever want to remove it. Fitting is the same though, we just cut a square, stick it to the driver's mount, peel off the backing and stick him down to the chassis. As long as the surfaces are super clean, he's going to stay put just about forever. Right, next we need to add some paint to the actual body. The instructions are pretty good, as you might expect from Tamiya. Essentially it's a case of wash it, mask it, spray it and peel it. We are going to go into a bit more detail though, so here we go. First step is we need to remove the light pods that we test fitted in the last video. With them removed, we need to use some dish soap and slightly warm water to thoroughly wash the body and the reinforcing piece. A soft bristle nylon brush is quite handy, along with some lint-free cloths to wipe up. The most important thing after cleaning is to make sure it's completely dry before moving on. Right, next we have the window masks. Now Tamiya provide us with a nice sheet, so all we need to do is cut them out and stick them down. I usually rough cut around the mask with a nice border, then go in for a more accurate trim. Some people like to use hobby knives, but I'm a fan of small scissors. It's really down to personal preference though. Once trimmed, offer it up to the body and get a feel for how it's going to fit. You might see the mask needs a little bit of extra trimming, just a hair off one side. Once you're happy with the fit, the mask can be stuck down. Now it's tempting just to peel the backing off and go for it, but not only will the mask try and curl up sticking to itself, it'll also be attracted to the body sticking to wherever it feels like. A good way around this is to peel a little bit of the backing away and trim it so you're left with a small exposed piece of the mask. Now you can position the mask just so, then smooth down the exposed part, and finally remove the rest of the backing. It's not a perfect solution, but as simple methods go, it's usually pretty good. Rinse and repeat with the side and rear windows, and as far as Tamiya is concerned, it's ready for paint. But I'm going to do a bit more. The body is going to be painted white, but it has black roll bars, which Tamiya do with some decals. All well and good, but after a few rollovers they're going to wear through, showing the white, and generally end up looking a bit untidy. There's also the black patch right at the front. Again, it's a prime spot to get scraped in a crash. That means it's time to get busy with the masking tape. As a rule, I use Tamiya tape for the edges and a cheap masking tape for the rest. After more than a few minutes, we have all the white bits masked off, just with the black bits exposed. Now we just need to apply some black paint suitable for Lexan or polycarbonate. Start with 2 or 3 very light coats. You should still be able to see through the shell when you're done. That's so the edges of the masking tape get sealed, but without there being so much paint it creeps under the edges. Then we apply 2 or 3 slightly heavier coats, or until the paint's nice and opaque. Leave it to dry for an hour or 2, then we peel. We need to be careful only to peel the tape that we added for the black and not disturb the window masks. Also be very careful not to touch the inside of the body and get finger grease all over it. Next we have the white paint. Using the same technique, we need to build it up until it's nice and opaque, not forgetting to paint the reinforcing part too. After another couple of hours, we need to remove the window masks. They're going to be really well stuck with the edges well sealed in paint. You can very gently get in under the corner and lift the mask with a slightly blunt knife. Then pull the mask up with some tweezers or pliers. It's a bit fiddly, just take care not to scratch the paint. In the last video we used a permanent marker to outline the parts before cutting them out. As you can see, some of it's still around the shell, especially as it's black on white. We don't need to clean it off though, as the entire shell is covered in an overspray film. It's almost invisible, but it's there and needs to be peeled off. All the markings, the old scrape and the overspray come away to reveal a pristine body. On larger bodies, I usually recommend only peeling it back a little bit at a time to apply the decals in stages, but this body's so small it would be a bit awkward. Instead, try and keep your fingers just to the windows so we don't get it greasy where the decals need to stick. And speaking of decals, there's rather a lot for this one, especially if it's a first time build. They are of course top quality, so if you're going to have a first experience, these are about as good as it gets. Applying the decals isn't something you can really do in a hurry, they need a fair bit of patience. With this kit the decals aren't pre-cut or kiss cut, you have to cut them all out by yourself. But that's not a bad thing. Quite often with kiss cut decals there's a huge border, or the cut chops off the edges of the print. So if you cut them yourself, you can control exactly what gets trimmed. In the case of this particular one, number 10, the vents above the windscreen, it's one decal with 2 vents. Now you can just cut and stick, but I'm going to cut them out individually. You can do whatever you like though, you can be creative or follow the book, it's completely up to you. To apply the decals, we, for the most part, use the same technique as the window masks, where we peel and trim a little of the backing away, position and stick the decal, then remove the rest. It's going to take a while, but just take care and eventually you'll end up with something like this. Looks rather good, I think, a classic Tamiya livery squashed up for the Comical body. And I think this is a good place to stop this week. There's really not that much left to do now, really it's just the electronics and a test run. As always then, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!